heard about ILoveLucy many times in my life, but never actually sat down to watch it with my family, who are also fans of it back in the day, until recently. On the one hand, I'm glad I saw it, because it really was revolutionary for its time. ILoveLucy was the first women-led situational comedy by its very own star, Lucille Ball, the first and only woman at the time to be the head of her own production company. This meant that we would see changes in how women were portrayed on screen in spite of their socially expected roles. Ball challenged what homemakers could be like. Lucy Ricardo and Ethel Mertz were not at all the demure, obedient housewives everyone assumed such women to be. Instead, they'd retort when they had opinions of their own and took matters into their own hands whenever they wanted something to be done. They, especially Lucy, had career goals of their own, and in showing their dedication, willed to get creative in order to achieve them. Even if it meant jumping through the most ridiculous of hoops. And we were dying to find out whether they'd finally succeed with each episode. They were always so endearingly hilarious, and actually quite sharp in their scheming. You really had to wonder if, by some twisted miracle, it all worked out, and we're the ones not trying hard enough in our own mundane lives. What made this duo especially compelling to watch was their supportive friendship. Before this sitcom, it was uncommon for unrelated women characters to be anything but catty toward one another. So seeing these two genuinely care for one another, no matter how difficult the situation could be, was not only refreshing, but also added to the overarching idea that women's personalities, interests, and tendencies are not confined in a bubble. It's not always about the destination, but rather the journey, which is why I didn't necessarily mind every time Lucy, and Ethel where applicable, was faced with failure. If there's something to be learned, I'm all for it. And considering the time period, it makes sense that Ball was working with what she had. People aren't proficient at every skill imaginable, particularly if they've never been given a chance. With that being said, I felt that the show was perhaps too unrewarding at times, as if it were secretly insinuating that women ultimately cannot deviate from their pre-established roles in society, which undermines both the sitcom's underlying premise and Ball's real-world achievements as a pioneer comedienne and businesswoman. Now, does this mean I consider the show to be downright discriminatory against women? Honestly, not as much as audiences today might. And I feel it goes both ways. Lucy and Ethel's husbands, Rick and Fred, are depicted as narrow-minded and dismissive of their wives' ideas, oftentimes not having much to offer themselves. I would even argue that Fred is much more compassionate toward Lucy than Ricky is, despite the latter two being a very romantic couple, contrasted by the palpable hatred between him and Ethel. Though Fred's style of humor is at least deadpan and cynical. As happy as I am that Bill pushed for an interracial marriage to be shown on television, Ricky was just not interesting to me, aside from his music. As if the spanking scenes weren't enough, Lucy and Ricky's dynamic becomes much more uncomfortable to watch when you realize Ball and Desi Arnaz were unhappily married in real life for 20 years due to his infidelity and alcoholism, never mind the stress of managing their company together, having their separate projects that often cause them to be apart for extended periods of time, and the constant speculation of Ball's political views. And having now seen the 2021 biographical drama Beating the Ricardos, it's become that much harder to rewatch some of their scenes together. This is where my enjoyment of the show wavers. Because while their chemistry is undeniable, you can't shake the sad feeling that they put so much effort into their power couple image when their lives were in shambles behind closed doors. Still, ILoveLucy had paved the path for so many women-driven comedies people love now, including Parks and Recreation, Orange is the New Black, and 30 Rock. Our hopeless dream chaser deserves the high praise she's gotten over the decades, not just for her content, but for her service to all women in showbiz. Because of ILoveLucy's significance in entertainment history, I did decide to take a more feministic approach with this video. Considering the era and all the obstacles Ball had to overcome to make the show happen, comedians now really do owe everything to her. There are outdated concepts in this show, and while they shouldn't detract from its brilliance otherwise, again, keep in mind the time period, they are important to remember when putting into perspective how men and women are written in contemporary media, given that some of the mentalities from ILoveLucy do carry over into our current content. The men's portrayals especially make them seem fairly unlikable. While I don't think this was Dissidia Productions' intention, it does make you wonder whether men at the time as a whole really were viewed this way deep down. It doesn't help that we still see some of those tropes, for instance, being obnoxious and kinda dumb, with some mainstream characters today. Think Peter Griffin from Family Guy, a show I don't think very many people care for in retrospect anyway. It definitely isn't good when a woman character is basically there to make the guys look good. For example, as much as I think, say, the 1992 legal drama A Few Good Men is great, I won't deny there is a little bit of that in there. But what I don't think gets talked about as much is when a man character is really only there to make the girls look good as well. And we're seeing this a lot in women-led narratives nowadays, which is why people took issue with something like the 2020 superhero film Birds of Prey. Remember, if you want believably well-written characters, don't fight fire with fire and base one character's qualities on the deterioration of another just because gender politics is your goal. Write characters with values anyone can look up to, and/or vices people will think about, that just so happen to be a certain gender.